Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who's joined already our DCED webinar. We have, at a guess, about, 50 people online already. People will keep joining, probably because we have 100 people who want to come and join. My name is Jim Tanburn. I'm coordinator for the committee, and I have with me in the office Melina Heinrich, who will speak next, and Adam Katzler, who will speak after that, and Eleanor Bell and Ashley Aarons are also here from the Secretariat. And on the other side of the planet, we have Amanda Jupp, who will speak after Adam. We have quite a range of participants. I have to say up front, we've got people who are coming to challenge funds and or results measurement for the first time, and we've got people who've got many years of experience on that. So we are going to try to have something for everyone. If you have a question during the hour, please type it into the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your Cisco WebEx window on the meeting. And we will record all the questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can in the hour. Obviously, the ones we don't get to, we already have 20 from your registrations, by the way, so we're not short of questions, but we certainly will take them forward. If you have a problem with your technology, which we will, of course, have, maybe send a text privately to Ashley Aarons, whose job is, he has the short straw of seeing if we can sort it out, and he will respond. There may be technical problems, but so far so good. We realize that Thursday morning is when they test our fire alarm, so if we disappear in a clanging bell, you'll know what's happened. In the slides you can see here is just a quick summary of the hour. We've got 3 minutes from Melina on the DCED for people who are not familiar with us. Then we've got Adam introducing the new guidelines on results measurement and challenge funds, and then we've got Amanda on the ground experience with ECF, and then we'll work through as many questions and answers as we can. So let me hand over to Melina to just introduce the DCED and some of our background work before we move on to Adam's presentation.
Yes, hello to everyone and good morning. Just a very brief overview of what the DCED actually is, especially for those perhaps who may not have heard about us so much before. So the DCED basically is a quite unique global forum of 24 donor and development agencies that work together to increase the effectiveness of private sector development interventions. And we're doing so across a range of PSD approaches. You can find lots of information on our website, for example, on issues like business environment reform, market development, and also partnership mechanisms such as challenge funds. So what does the DCED actually do? There are sort of 3 main pillars of our work, and one is, first of all, to exchange experience among headquarters and with field staff on current practice and new trends, to synthesize knowledge on what works well, what doesn't work, and also, finally, for our members to develop common guidance on what constitutes effective practice. So in the area of challenge funds, this has obviously been a modality which has become increasingly popular in the recent years. So we asked ourselves the question, what can we really learn from experience in this area? What might constitute effective practice? So we've done quite a thorough review earlier last year of different challenge funds and their results. And what we found in essence was that despite the high expectations, we actually know relatively little about the results achieved and in particular the development impacts. Others have also come to similar conclusions as we did. Just to quote a few, there has been a review done for the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which concluded that the evidence based on results is still scarce in this area, and successful partnerships have been elusive. Also, the North South Institute, a widely quoted study, noted that commercial and development impact of the projects is hard to assess, basically due to the lack of information and data, which is also visible in the fact that most of the publicly available documents you can find, basically they consist of very simple success stories without very credible data. So the key question really is, how can challenge funds approach results measurement more effectively? And what are the benefits for donors, but also fund managers, as well as businesses? So I will now hand over to Adam, who will present a few answers to these questions.
Okay, thank you, Melina, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar. It's a bit of an experiment for the DCED, so please give us feedback by typing in the chat window or sending us an email after. So this presentation is based on the DCED guidance to measuring results in challenge funds using the DCED standard. This was published about 4 months ago, based on quite a lot of experience gathered from Enterprise Challenge Fund, African Enterprise Challenge Fund, Business Innovation Facility, and many, many more, which I won't list all of them. But we're continuing to learn a lot about how to measure results in challenge funds, and please share your experience with the comment box and let us know if you're interested in further events. I will start off with just a quick summary of the DCED standard itself. It's an 8-part framework for results measurement in private sector development. That is the fire alarm being tested. If you can hear that, it should stop in just a second. Brilliant. With impeccable timing. So just to let me know where you're all coming from, could we take 10 seconds? If you know about the DCED standard very well, please type yes in the comment box. If you've never heard of it, type no. And if you know a very small amount about it, type maybe. A quick no. Thank you, Sophia. You have 10 seconds to write, so please do so quickly. Also helping me check that you can all hear me fine.
But it doesn't, maybe.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks a lot. So most people haven't heard of it. So the DCED standard is a framework for results measurement in private sector development. It's based on a compilation of existing best practice from practitioners in the field working in private sector development, and it's used by programs to help them measure, manage, and demonstrate results. It's used by about 30 programs around the world. The map on the right shows approximately where it's used, and it's now used by quite large-scale programs, influencing or used by perhaps $1 billion worth of development programming. So we're learning a lot about how to use it and how best to measure results. Let me just go. Here are the 8 elements of the DCED standard. It starts by articulating a theory of change or results change for the program. You then define indicators based on this, measure them, try and attribute impact to your program. You look at wider systemic change, which I'm sure will cause controversy in the discussion at the end. And you use this results to manage your system, to improve what you're doing. And this means your results measurement doesn't just collect and sit on a shelf or even just get used in a glossy report for donors, but you somehow use it to improve the quality of your program. And how can you do this in a challenge fund? Why should you measure results? Well, there are 4 main reasons. So firstly, it's useful for fund management. It can inform your decisions to award funding, to scale up funding to successful businesses, or to reduce funding. It can also assist businesses themselves. The information you get from results measurement is typically about the producers and the suppliers to the business or their customers. So this is actually really useful information to inform the business model as well as your kind of assessment of impact, especially if you're working with smaller businesses which don't have good systems set up. This can be really valuable. It should promote learning for other challenge funds, and also you want to demonstrate the impact of challenge funds to donors and the public. So what are the challenges? Why is this difficult? There are a couple of different ones. Firstly, challenge funds often fund a very diverse range of projects. For example, African Enterprise Challenge Fund funds everything from an online marketplace for cattle in Zimbabwe, financial services in Sierra Leone, beer brewing in South Sudan. And the map on the right actually shows the countries where they work. This is an area 3 times the size of the European Union. So even getting to the businesses can be quite a challenge. And of course, as I'm sure you all know from different sides of the donor-implementer divide, there's a real pressure to keep staffing and overheads low in challenge funds. And sadly, results measurement is often seen as a kind of administrative cost. So there's another point which is important. It's not really a challenge, but it's worth raising. That in a challenge fund, you don't expect every business to succeed. Experience from the commercial world suggests that between a quarter and 3/4 of startups fail. That is, they don't produce returns for their investor, or they aren't able to repay the initial investment at all. And this would be expected to be the same or even higher in challenge funds, which may not be funding startups, but are looking for kind of risky businesses which might not get funding elsewhere. So what implications does this have for the results measurement system? Firstly, it needs to accept failure and not disincentivize it, which is linked to Robert's question about log frames at the beginning. This is not necessarily an issue with the design of the results measurement system, as the organizational culture and the way in which management and donors treat it. And secondly, there's no point in investing in expensive baselines and surveys if the business itself isn't successful. You would have really valuable lessons to learn about business development in difficult circumstances, but you're not going to see an impact on seed farmers if the business you supported never sold any seed. Thank you for the question, Eric. I will email around the slides which have useful presentation. Okay, so this leads us to the key recommendation of this, which is to take a portfolio approach. Faced with resource limitations, fund managers can prioritize the monitoring of more expensive, more successful, or more innovative projects. But you can't identify these successful projects straight away. It might be a couple of years before you really know what the successful projects are. So consequently, you need a minimum level of monitoring for every project which is reliable and which gets you the information you need to identify these stars and prioritize them for more intensive monitoring. So we will recommend using the framework of the DCED standard to establish this minimum level of monitoring and then aim to implement the full DCED standard, which is a set of 8 points with sub-criteria for this star project. So what does it mean to say we need a minimum level of monitoring from every project? What is this minimum? The basis for good results measurement is always understanding the project logic. So how the company expects to achieve its business and development objectives. In other words, why is your grant funding to the business going to make a difference to anything? So this is conveniently set out in a results chain, which you see on the right of the screen. And this is the first step of the DCED standard, recommending you have a results chain for each project, which has activities down the bottom, leading to impact at the top. And this is of benefit both in clarifying your own thinking about how you expect the project to have a benefit, and also to get yourself and the business on the same page. So the business understands what you as the fund manager expect to get out of it, and you understand the business objectives, especially if you do it collaboratively. Design the results chain collaboratively. Cool. So have designed results chain to select appropriate indicators and basically we recommend focusing on information so the business can credibly report. So businesses will collect really important information which you need for your results measurement systems. We will give some examples of this in the next slide, but it will vary according to the business. And you need to work with the business to understand what they can credibly report at minimal additional cost for them, and And then you will probably need to validate this by visiting the business and maybe visiting a small sample of beneficiaries. This will help you understand how the business is progressing and help you understand maybe a few early indications of impacts of the law, but you need to understand its limitations. By itself, business self-reporting will not deliver credible results on impact. In almost every case, the business just doesn't have that information. Okay, so here are some examples of what an appropriate indicator might be for a business to report. Firstly, the first example is an outgrower scheme, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, also called contract farmers. This is where a business contracts a farmer to deliver a certain amount of produce at an agreed price. So it's a way, I guess, of reducing the risks of the farmer and allowing the farmer better access to inputs and financing. So these contract growers can normally report how many farmers they work with, how much they purchase at what price, and often they can say how many inputs they supplied. But typically they don't know what the opportunity cost for the farmer is. They don't know how much income the farmer gave up in order to join this fantastic outgrower scheme. So they're not able to say what the impact is, what the additional income of the farmer is. You would need to collect that information yourself. A seed supplier would be different. They would know how much seed was sold and what the improvement was in the yield, but they wouldn't know how many farmers they sold to in most cases because they don't know how much. They don't record their sales by farmer. They just do a kilogram of seed. Again, this is very business dependent. Okay, so these two things are what we want to do for every project to set the groundwork. You need a good results chain, you need good indicators reported by the business. And then for star projects, you want to invest in good results measurement so you can show changes at all levels of the results chain, from the activity through to the impact level. You can use the framework of the DCED standard as a credible basis for results measurement. It sets out in detail what is expected, and then your results measurement system can be audited by experienced consultants who have worked in this field before. And this gives confidence to donors in the external community that the results you were reporting have a good basis behind them. You can also examine wider changes in market systems. I think we've already had a question on this from FMAP. And if this is something which your challenge fund is set up to deliver, it's definitely something you would want to be monitoring. And a final slide, I'll talk briefly about how to do all this, how to do this kind of good quality monitoring for your successful projects. And then I'll hand over to Amanda, who will talk in more detail about how they did this in the Enterprise Challenge Fund. But a few key principles. You want to start with information the business can supply, as we've been talking about. African Enterprise Challenge Fund has a useful concept of the last hard number. This is the furthest up the results chain that the business can report just based on its own internal data systems. For example, in an outgrower scheme, this is probably how much they paid to their outgrowers. And from that, you say, right, what else do we need to know in order to estimate our impact on the farmers? And this will show you what additional data collection you need to do. And for this, you would want to do surveys of some sort, qualitative or quantitative, but there is a huge mixture of methods you could use to gather data directly from the target group, the poor consumers or suppliers of the business. And you will look for opportunities to collect additional baseline data. We can get into the technicalities in the discussion, but baselines are often an issue in challenge funds. To use a really simple example, there is no point in surveying 500 farmers in Malawi if the business then decides it actually wants to work in Zambia. And there's often quite a lot of chopping and changing in the early parts of the business model design. But you will then, if the business is successful, you will typically be able to collect additional baseline data. For example, if it expands into a new area, if it takes on new customers or new clients, then you can use baseline data from that expansion. And finally, it's really important to make results measurement useful to the business at all stages. And there are lots of ways in which you can do this, but firstly, making clear why you want this information and how it can help the business. So how your surveys of its customers can also inform its pricing and marketing decisions. Sharing terms of reference and studies with the business so that they can input into it, suggest additional questions which they want to ask, and hopefully use the results to inform their business model. So that is, sorry, I'm trying not to get distracted by some really interesting questions coming into the chat window. That is the end of my presentation, and I'll just end by mentioning the online resources on our website where you can download the guidelines, various papers, and a case study from ECF. You can also sign up to our regular newsletter, and we will email this presentation round, so you'll be able to click on the link if you don't have to write them down now. And now I will hand over to Amanda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adam, and good evening, everyone from Australia. Well, it's about 19:25 here, and it's great to be taking a break from watching the Australian Open on our summer TV to join everyone in talking about results measurement. So I'd like to thank Adam and Jim and the DCED team for having me here today to talk about the Enterprise Challenge Fund. I'm also glad that our results measurement advisor, Waka, is hopefully able to join us online from Malawi to offer any of the points from her perspective. So I'd like to introduce you to a small challenge fund in the Pacific and Southeast Asia. The Enterprise Challenge Fund was developed as a pilot program by the Australian government and funded through what is now the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. The program had 14.5 million in grants, and that was distributed over 6 years. It concluded last year. From 2007 to 2009, the ECF ran bidding rounds, open to 9 countries across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. Companies developed bids for grants of between 100,000 and 1.5 million Australian dollars. This contributed at least 50% of the project costs, would be commercially sustainable within 3 years, and have clear pro-core benefits, economic benefits like employment and income generation, and access to goods and services. From 3 bidding rounds, there were 21 projects that made it through to the end of 3 years. Now I'll just put up this map here to give you an indication of the geographic spread. We had lots of different industries because the fund didn't have an industry focus, and it was open to all industries. So we funded everything from duck out growing in Fiji to cruise ship tourism in Vanuatu, from chocolate in the Solomon Islands to mobile phone payments in Cambodia. So you can probably imagine from here what some of the challenges were when designing a measurement system for a program like this. So as Adam covered in his presentation, and our challenge fund was not much different. The fund was designed with a light touch, hands-off approach to monitoring. But the ECF was a pilot, not only for Australian aid, but also the first one in the Asia Pacific. And therefore it was really important to understand the effectiveness of the program through rigorous impact assessment. So in 2010, we started to talk to our client and the team at the DCED about how we could strengthen our system. There are also a number of considerations to go through before we thought about changing the system. Many programs out there might be relating to this, so it's important to mention that this wasn't an easy decision. Firstly, the ECF program was midstream, so the change was likely to cause disruption to the program. A results measurement approach, in essence, changed the nature of the relationship with the company, so we needed to be a lot closer if we were expecting to provide them any useful service or information. Our field staff were not skilled in results measurement. They were business development managers, so we weren't sure if they were or could be interested in measuring development impact. And the DCED standard was quite new at the time. It hadn't been used for a challenge fund. So it's almost like, we knew that the plan was we thought that the plan might be really straightforward, but we knew in reality there were going to be a lot of challenges to overcome. But we were a small program and we had the luxury of not having to run any more bidding rounds. So after strong consideration as well as a lot of pair pulling and cheers, we set out to design a new results measurement system in line with the DCED standard. Now, we had a lot of support from the DCED team and their experts, and also at this time we had our new advisor, Waka, commence, and she took on a strong leadership role. So we might get into a bit of the detail on what the new system looked like. We took an incremental approach to improving the light touch system rather than just starting again. We had very basic results streams for our project, and we strengthened these by talking them through with our companies to talk about what we were looking at in terms of its impact. Now, I've put up there a quote from Lucy from Tasman Bureau Handmade Paper in the Philippines. When we were running her through the results change, she quoted that she was really interested because we looked at lots of aspects outside of the company. So you can see here why it's really important that we had our own monitoring system and not just relying on reporting from the company. We also improved quality and quantity of indicators that examine the changes in the results chain in more detail. Our previous approach used a number of standardized indicators and tools across all the projects, but the new approach, we tailored surveys to individual projects to get to that part of the impact story. We also talked to companies about their own monitoring systems and what information existed and could be fit for purpose or adapted. Interestingly, this also identified areas where the company business systems were weak, particularly with small to medium enterprises, and in some cases we were able to suggest business advice or offer technical support from existing organisations for these business impacts. The other aspect where we also reduced time for the M&E advisor to work on the monitoring. She took on more of a role of mentoring for field staff, who then increased their role in the program, bringing that management and the monitoring a lot closer together. And also in 2 countries, we brought in additional junior staff to assist with the measurement and the surveys. We also developed a regular schedule, and I know somebody has asked a question about the minimum time frame to monitor, and there is no answer, but we had 3 to 6 months depending on those projects, depending on what type of project and how fast they were growing. We would send people out to the field to talk to the companies and their employees for regular interviews and surveys with beneficiaries, really examining that process for change. For example, one of our programs, WING, was a mobile phone payment program in Cambodia. We used a number of tools to gather information about the benefits to clients. We had a baseline study from the ISC. We did our own surveys through cash merchants and talking with random customers as they came up to the cash merchant. And non-customers. We also used information from the company database, and this so we could accurately triangulate our results. And finally, we started looking at how this information was useful in decision making, not just whether we should continue to fund the grants, but also how could this be useful for the project implementation. For example, there were 2 tourism companies, and they were particularly interested in our surveys and asked additional questions and suggestions, recommendations, so to add into those surveys so we could ask the tourism providers and tourists as we spoke to them. The Carnival cruise ship program in Vanuatu was also keen to have more information. Their project sites were spread out over remote islands in Vanuatu. So, for example, in our request for gender disaggregated information on employment and the training programs they were running, the company noticed the discrepancies, so they established a 50-50 gender approach to all their training. I thought at this point in time, I might take a break to briefly share with you a photo from the Carnival Cruise program. So in fact, this was one of the best ways for our country managers to collect information on income from passengers and storeholders was to be at the cruise site. So our country manager had to spend a few nights on a tropical cruise boat sailing around Vanuatu. In fact, I think this could be a great advertisement for a career in results measurement. If there's anyone out there interested in a job like this, maybe you can email through later. So if we get back to our presentation, go well. So far we had a strong monitoring system in place for all projects. Being a challenge fund, we had little funds to spend on monitoring, so from the initial assessment of projects, we could only go in deep for a certain assessment of projects. So we picked 7 projects to monitor more closely. We chose innovative projects that were already profitable and successful, those that contributed to around 90% of our impact. So at this point, I'd like to introduce you to one of those in more detail. From cruising around the Pacific Islands, we go to providing insurance in rural Cambodia. Meter Microinsurance received one of the smallest grant values, just under 200,000 Australian dollars, but was funded at a critical time as the microinsurance industry in Cambodia was in very early days, unregulated, and had only allowed pilots by Microfinance Institute, of which there was only one operating. A local Cambodian MFI called Samic Microfinance, in partnership with the Philippine group Romancy, wanted to trial such a pilot. The company needed the ECF grant for two reasons. Microinsurance has a high setup cost and low returns, so the board was reluctant to invest. The public was also uninformed about insurance, so what the company was having to do was essentially undertake a public good to train people in insurance concepts. Using the ECF funds, NIDA set up an initial loan protection and also a life insurance to cover the cost of the loan and provide a cash payment to support the family in the event of the death of a loan holder. Using our improved results measurement system, we addressed the area of the results chain and spoke regularly to companies, the wider industry, and some small surveys of the insured clients from a number of districts to profile the types of clients, what they use the loan for, and therefore what the insurance was protecting. So we had a good impact story so far. After 2 years, NIDA was breaking even and was interested in improving their offerings, as well as working with new clients outside of the original MFI. At the time, the Cambodian government was also looking at official legislation for microinsurance. There was a clear choice for our STAR project, so we decided to gather more information. The final step in the results chain, and you may be able to read it if you've got your magnifying glasses close to your desk, was that the insurance provided protection from death in the event of a death. We knew people were insured and how the insurance paid out the clients and when they needed it. But to fully understand the program, we wanted to examine the counterfactual of the benefit. What was the difference for clients having insurance in the case of a death or disability compared to not having it? So we brought in the experts. In 2012, we funded the Microinsurance Centre to run their milk survey, a quasi-experimental study using the treatment and control group to understand the benefit of microinsurance. The study involved conducting in-depth case studies of two groups, 25 in each group. The control group had a loan with another MFI, but no insurance and had suffered a crisis, mostly death. And the treatment group had a loan and microinsurance from NIDA and had also suffered a crisis. The study looked into understanding and analysing the benefit of having microinsurance in such situations. For those who are interested in the paper itself and the findings, that's included on our website if you want to know more of the details. So a couple of examples on how the research fundings were actually used. The study provided useful information to the company NIDA on how the service was highly considered by the claimants, but also the survey found that training only the clients in insurance was a drawback, as in most cases it was a family member processing the claim. So NIDA designed and ran a new training program targeting just those family members on insurance. Definitely, the study also had implications for the microinsurance as an industry. It found that both groups surveyed had a large level of formal and informal debt, not just microfinance debt. And the insurance was on one loan was very beneficial, but this was dwarfed in terms of the large number of other debts that the household needed to be paid. Insurance was useful, but it needed to be more available. Based on this, the ECF also funded a workshop with NIDA, the Microinsurance Centre, and other Cambodian MFIs about the benefits of microinsurance, and we presented the results of this study. And this led to a number of those MFIs showing interest in either setting up their own business or partnering with NIDA, so insurance could be available to their own customers. Also, having the Microinsurance Centre undertake the study meant that research was also disseminated across their network, and a relationship was developed between the centre and the company. So this is just an example of where improving our system and using it as a results measurement approach has proven its worth. Considering that the original monitoring system was only looking at the development concept of access to goods and services, or the number of signings, whereas learning about the use and benefits of insurance in this case has fed back valuable information to the company and also the industry. It's also providing a strong rationale for scaling up insurance in Cambodia. So as a final slide to my presentation before we get into the questions, and there's a whole lot of really great questions coming through, I'd like to recap on some of the changes to our new systems in the program. We have better credibility in the numbers and the results. We're able to articulate the impact stories a lot better. The process and the information we collected is more useful to the business and the wider industry, so we're no longer just considering what went into the donor report. were able to highlight also areas where the business needed more support. And finally, importantly, it was also improving the management of our fund. We had our key staff more involved in the results. We had a DCED audit, which provided a bit of an imperative for our staff to continue with the system and collect data. And finally, our evaluation was a lot better, and I got feedback from one of our independent reviewers that, it was a lot better, and they didn't have to have a lot of people in the field asking the same questions. So just a point on the DCED audit, in 2013 was submitted as part of our portfolio, our 7 highest star projects for review. In fact, we didn't expect that we'd get 100% compliance given where we had started. So the score that we got was 76%, and it was really pleasing, particularly in light of how our results were actually much more useful than we ever thought. So for those who are interested, we've also shared this audit report on both the ECF and the DCED website. I think it's good to share because it isn't a perfect result. So to end, I'm reminded of a quote from martial art expert Bruce Lee that a goal is not always meant to be reached. It often serves simply as something to aim at. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand back to the team to start the question time.
Okay, thank you so much, Amanda. I hope everyone was well able to follow that. The sound was certainly good quality here in Cambridge. Let me hand over to Adam to tackle 1 or 2 questions, and then once Amanda's had a chance to catch her breath, we'll hand back to her. Adam.
Cool, thanks very much. Thanks, Amanda. Several really interesting questions coming through in the chat box. And I wanted to start with one from Rubayat, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, which was, if you are focusing on stars for measurement, how do you ensure that you are learning from the failures? So that is a really important question. I guess part of the answer is that you really learn different things from the successes and from the failures, and you learn this in different ways. So the type of results measurement you need to do will accordingly vary. So from a project which is financially unsuccessful, you can probably learn a lot about how business works in developing countries, what are the factors kind of underlying its lack of success, what are the risks it faced, and how could it have done better. So a lot of these, if you think about the results chain, it would be things at the lower level of the results chain, the activities, the output, what were the challenges in doing these activities. So I think a lot of this will come from business self-reporting and from having a good relationship with the business where you can talk honestly with them about the successes and their challenges. And this is something I think which you will need, a challenge fund manager should have for every business in its portfolio, not only the stars. So when I say focus on stars for measurement, I guess this is really going beyond that to kind of surveying beneficiaries, trying to work out the impact of the project. And it might even be worth, I think African Enterprise Challenge Fund was talking about a case study looking at 4 or 5 of their failures and saying, what can we learn from this? So that kind of thing would be really interesting. I'll also briefly talk about a question from Robert Smith, which he sent in right at the beginning of this webinar, which I guess shows how important it is to him, which is how do you set targets for log frames? If you set your targets at the beginning of the challenge fund, it risks being meaningless. If you don't set a target at all, then it also there's not much point in having a target. I guess there's no easy solution to this. It's a problem I'm also wrestling with in an M40 project. So we can firstly note that at the moment, we don't know much about how much impact a challenge fund can expect to have. We don't have any benchmarks to compare it against. And without these benchmarks, it's really difficult to set a target because you don't have much to base it in. So I guess my inclination in this would generally be setting a target, as Robert says, can distort incentives. And if your target isn't based on anything, then it's not a useful management tool. So I have one. Unfortunately, this rubs against the donor imperative to have a log frame with targets and milestones and everything. And at that point, you almost enter into a negotiation phase where you need to kind of satisfy the donor's need for effective processes with the fact that you don't want to be held accountable for something you don't know anything about. I think using the DCED standard can be part of the solution in that it emphasizes the process which you go for to get results measurement rather than putting all of your eggs into a single log-frame target basket. But maybe that is a topic for a different seminar. And I think Amanda is also taking a couple of questions, so I will hand over to her now.
Great, thanks, Adam. So there's a couple of questions that have come in that I'll respond to. Firstly, Eva asked, what's the relationship between the quasi-experimental study and the results chain? And this relates to the MEDA, our STAR project MEDA, where we looked at getting this experimental study in our results chain. Now, I think the results chain was quite small, so it was a bit difficult to see, but we were tracking it from the training that the microinsurance was providing all the way through to the knowledge and benefits of the microinsurance of the clients. Finally, our last step in the results chain was that people were protected from death. Now, in the event of the death of the client. So what we had already in our basic monitoring system was we were looking at that people had taken up this insurance, and that we knew from those that had actually benefited from the insurance, of which there was actually only 155 had made a claim, that people had this insurance and it was being done. I guess what we were trying to see is the difference between without the project, without the actual funding of the project and this insurance. What was the difference for those people between having insurance and not having insurance? So we're essentially looking at the attribution of without the company, not just without the ECF. So that's why we picked that particular study, because it highlighted the value of the insurance to the people that were making claims. So the second question is from Jem, and talks about sample sizes. And the question is, how small is a small sample? Is it 25 plus 25 or 200 households? In this case, what we were doing was we're trying to take a large sample size of I think we generally picked about 10% or a set number to try and make sure that we had covered some relevance in the sample size. So in this case, we picked 25, of which 155 had made a claim, so it was about 20% of those that had already made a claim. So when we talk about the clients and the numbers that we've actually interviewed of the clients, and there's 10,000, we took a very small sample size because we just didn't have the ability to spend a lot of time in the field going and talking to 10,000 people. So in this case, I think we've spoken to about 100 people overall. 100 of the clients, but 100 out of 10,000 is quite a small sample size. Looking at a project like the WING project, at the end of the project, they had 500,000 clients. So there was no way that we would be able to get a relatively good sample size. As part of the baseline study, we had 260 interviews, and then later on down the track, we took another 260. So we were still dealing with quite a small sample size, but that was really to do with the fact that we had limited resources for the results measurement, particularly for the baseline. So finally, Jonan has asked the question, did this organisation apply for a mock audit by the DCED? I think they're now called pre-audit check. And yes, the ECF actually had a mock audit done, or a pre-audit review done in 2011, which was a really great, it was good because we'd already had about 2 years of implementing the standard, and we thought that we had good sense of where we would got up to, but we needed to see how much further we needed to go with the standard. So it was really useful to have a mock audit, and that gave us a good position to try and go for the next step. And interestingly, it was really after that mock audit that we decided that we needed to focus on certain projects rather than trying to apply the standard across every single project that we had. Because some of them were very small, and some of them were obviously a lot bigger and worthy of more investment. So I think that's the three questions that I've got through, and I might hand back to Adam to answer some of the next questions that have come up.
Cool, thanks Amanda. Hi Carolyn, and thanks for your question on costs in challenge funds. There are quite a lot of variables which can affect it. I think one of the key variables is actually the size of the grant, because the results measurement cost typically is typically pretty similar regardless of how big the grant is. So if you were giving out $2 million to an organisation, and you can have a much higher level of results measurement for the same proportional cost as a $200,000 grant. Obviously also geographic locations, spread, what level of results measurement you want are also important. I can't really give definite percentages, and to my knowledge there isn't any study which looks into it in detail. I know that obviously 5 to 10% is kind of banded around as in M4P programs in general as cost for results measurement. But a lot of the time the costs really go into the overlap with everything else that the Challenge Fund is doing, all of our activities to award grants, due diligence, checking that the money is used appropriately. There's a strong overlap between that and the additional results measurement activities you want to do, so it might not be possible to divide it up particularly. And I think handing back to Amanda, we have a remark from Robert Smith, which is his experience is 0.5% to 10%, depending on the donor's appetite. So 10% is differed, which is useful. Amanda is now going to talk about attribution, so I will pass back to her.
Thanks, Adam. It's one of my favourite topics. So, Caroline Ashley from the Business Innovation Facility asked the question, and also Jehan also added a question on measuring attribution in people's thinking and about some of those methodologies. And I guess I can really only speak to the experience of the ECS. We measured attribution through the results chain, really looking at the causality of the events leading from funding the business to undertake those activities, all the way through to how this benefits the customers and suppliers. At each step, we tested the cause and effect relationship. So how does the training lead to more knowledge on a product, or how does that then lead to more people signing up to use a product or to supply a good? We found that attribution was much simpler to measure lower down the results chain. For example, how the ECS funds led to improvements in the business or training the suppliers, but as we travelled up the results chain, or how the activities of those business impact on the customers and suppliers. So what we looked at really was the net attributable income from the company or the beneficiary. So very much what was that step between the company and the beneficiary. Measuring beyond this is a lot more difficult, especially without a really strong baseline survey. So when we could measure the attribution at the higher levels of the results chain, for example, what would happen to the beneficiaries if the company wasn't there, you needed to fund bigger research studies to completely understand this impact. And these would be quite different studies depending on the type of program. So I already talked about the quasi-experimental study we used in the microinsurance program, which looked really at that complex question of the impact of insurance for a family following the death of the loan holder versus what would happen without the insurance. I guess the second example, now I'll go back to WIN because these are some of the ones I spent a lot of my own time on. We used a comparative study. We examined what were the methods for transferring funds that most people would use when WIN was in place, such as using taxis or money changes to send money from one place to another, and the cost of using Lean to understand both the financial and non-financial benefits. We used a large baseline study by the ISD, and then we also used our own validation through the field visits. I guess what we were really focusing on was those projects that had the higher potential. So we measured the attribution really at the highest score level there. So I'm hoping that answers the question on attribution. It's a big topic that could probably have its own webinar. I might turn back to Adam. See what other questions you've got.
Maybe I'll just take it back for a second, because there is a question on JAM. I'm not sure if we've really mentioned yet, this is Jim Sanborn here, whether the ECF audit is actually on our website. It might have been mentioned in passing, but there isn't a link on the presentation. So you can actually see how, as a brave pioneer, first challenge fund to go through an audit process. There are a couple of other audits there of more M4P programs. Just to respond to a couple of questions also that got asked during the webinar now. One was about mock audits. We in DCED have necessarily to distance ourselves a little bit from what we used to call mock audits and what we've taken to call them pre-audit reviews, simply because any program can hire any consultant to use all the documentation on our website to do some kind of an audit on their program. That obviously doesn't have any sort of official status, and what we found was that people were kind of blurring the line between hiring a consultant and using all the paperwork to do some kind of an audit and a proper DCED audit. So we've sort of dropped the term mock audit just because it seems to encourage people to think that they had a full audit. We've had about 10 programs go through an audit process so far, and but ECF is the only challenge one. There was a question on market development approaches. I think it's probably worth mentioning that the origin of challenge funds long ago was that they would bring out the creativity and the really wacky, out-of-the-box ideas that business might bring to the table. And even now you see challenge funds being launched on the rationale that we're not quite sure what to do as a donor, let's get some ideas from the private sector. So that approach to harness the creativity almost inherently doesn't take a market approach. It doesn't take a systematic, analytical, rigorous lens. It invites, the crazy stuff that might be out there. Now, of course, you can fit it within a market framework, but the original light touch measurement of challenge funds was sort of on that basis that the ideas would come from the private sector, and there wasn't perhaps such a need to be careful on measurement. And you only see now that people are becoming more focused on measurement issues. Adam, you wanted to say something? We've got a couple more minutes. If anyone's got are there any standard reporting formats? And key questions. I'm not quite sure I understand the question, Megan. I'll hand over to Adam while we're working out the question.
Cool. Thanks, Jim. I just wanted to pick up on the question on attribution and look at attribution at the lower levels of the results chain, which is sometimes called additionality, which is the kind of, would the business have done this even if we hadn't given it funding? Would it have got funding somewhere else? Would it have done it differently somehow? And I think these questions are generally really hard to answer, especially kind of looking at it after you've actually given funding, because there's no obvious counterfactual, there's no large sample size. One idea which I thought would be really interesting but I haven't seen done would be to go back to businesses which didn't get funding, either because they were almost good enough but not quite, or because you didn't think it was additional enough, and see if they actually did the project or something similar. But I just wanted to highlight that Melina has an upcoming publication on additionality, which will answer these and many more questions. I've been lucky enough to read the first draft and immediately copied as much as I could for another report I was writing, so it's very good. And look out for that on the DCED website.
Excellent. Right, let me pass back to Amanda briefly and then to Melina, and then we'll have some closing comments. Amanda.
Thank you. I think I'll just make a really quick point on one of Sharena's questions about gender mainstreaming. And she asked, especially at the small and medium scale level, are there examples for businesses where inclusion of women is very beneficial for them? And the point is a really good point, and it's something that isn't very common in challenge funds, and certainly we didn't have a gender aspect to our challenge fund at all. We had simple things like making sure that it was something that the panels looked at. It was something that we asked for gender disaggregated data, but really beyond that, there wasn't a focus on gender or women's economic empowerment in our challenge fund. Now, so in 2012, we actually did a study on the impact of the project on women and what were the sorts of things that we could have done better. So there is a paper with a lot more information about that that we've put together, and it's on our website if you'd like more information. And yeah, so I think that should cover it off. But if you do want more information, please feel free to message me separately. So we're heading back to Melina now.
Okay, yes, thank you. I just wanted to pick up the point that Adam mentioned on additionality, and of course one important angle on this is how you assess it ex post, for example, through a control group of applicants who haven't received support, as Adam mentioned. Another way to look at it is ex ante, and I think this is an area that many agencies are very interested in the moment. There are two sides to look at this: is how you measure it and really what you measure it. And we've seen that there are two problems. One is that the criteria of assessing additionality ex ante are often quite narrowly or vaguely defined, and also the processes are often not very credible, really. So sort of reduced to a box-ticking exercise for the business, just asking whether they need support or not, for example. So to really get a credible answer on the question of additionality, we think there's much more work to be done and there's room for improvement. So this is just to flag that we are working now with a range of agencies on developing some good practice recommendations. And we look also very much forward to sharing that with you and perhaps also have your feedback on that in the near future.
Okay, thanks a lot, Melina. That's fantastic. Just to respond finally to quickly Caroline and Megan's questions, we have a lot of guidance on our website, and do have a look at that. We'll email everyone now with a link to hopefully the presentation for this and indeed the recording of the hour. We have found it's hard to strike a balance because the basics are going to be the same pretty much whatever you do. But the application may be different, the words might be slightly different, the format and the templates, which means that when we come to audit, we're very, very flexible. We're just looking for some documentation, some paper trail that shows what, who did what and when, in any format that the program chooses. Perhaps with challenge funds, it's more a question of who does what, who pays for it, and how to triangulate to get some sort of credibility. Let me close the webinar now because we've been going for a good hour. It's been really interesting, fantastic questions, and we will follow up. Let this not be the ending, but just the end of the beginning. And thank you for joining, and you'll be hearing from us in due course. And thanks for your comments on the chat as well. Okay, goodbye to everyone.